The first time I caught her standing at the edge of my yard with a measuring tape and a smug little notebook, I knew Wanda Zellner was going to be a problem. She was the HOA's vice president, self-appointed yard aesthetics czar, and a walking, talking codebook with a platinum bob and a stare that could curdle milk. I'd moved into the neighborhood 6 months earlier, just a quiet 39-year-old electrician named Kellan Zade, hoping to enjoy the little patch of green behind my modest ranch-style home. But Wanda saw me as a threat to her iron rule over the cul-de-sac. "You've got runoff coming from your downspout," she said, pointing like she was accusing me of a felony. "It's pooling near the sidewalk. That's a hazard. I'll need it redirected within 72 hours or I'll issue a citation." "A citation?" I raised an eyebrow. "For water. For non-compliance with HOA Regulation 32C, drainage responsibility lies with the homeowner." "Look it up." I had looked it up. Regulation 32C didn't exist. But arguing with Wanda was like arguing with a soggy bag of flour, messy, pointless, and likely to fall apart in your hands. I figured if I ignored her long enough, she'd move on to harassing someone else's lawn gnome placement or mailbox height. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, during a rare weekend off from my job rewiring a hospital in the city, I walked out back and stepped ankle-deep into a swamp that hadn't been there the day before. My entire backyard was flooded, grass submerged, garden beds destroyed, and my kid's sandbox now a floating disaster zone. I followed the water's trail and found the source. Wanda had installed a brand new gutter extension on the back of her 2-story house. It snaked along the fence line and ended just above my property line, pointed directly at my yard. I stared at it for a long minute, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Pranked!" But no, the water was still trickling steadily out of it, soaking everything I owned. I marched straight to her door, soaked boots and all. She answered with a glass of lemon water in one hand and a fake smile painted across her over Botoxed face. "Wanda," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you redirected your gutter into my yard. You flooded my property." "That's simply not true," she said, sipping her drink. "My contractor ensured everything was up to code. Perhaps if your yard had proper drainage, this wouldn't be a problem." I blinked. "You literally aimed it at my lawn." "It's gravity, dear. Water flows downhill. It's not my fault your yard is poorly designed." Couldn't believe it. She wasn't even trying to deny it, just blamed me for the consequences of her own sabotage. "Fix it," I said, jaw clenched. "I'll take it to the board," she said sweetly. "We'll see what they decide." She never brought it up in the next meeting. But I got a fine in the mail 3 days later. Excessive yard water accumulation violation of HOA Regulation 32C. $150. She flooded my yard and fined me for it. I didn't pay it. I didn't even respond. What I did instead was get to work. I'm not the kind of guy who lets people walk all over me. And I sure as hell don't let someone weaponize water against me. I spent the next few evenings digging a shallow trench along the fence line, just wide enough and deep enough to collect what poured in from her gutter. I lined it with gravel and ran it 30 feet along the edge of my yard. Then I installed a discreet corrugated drainage pipe at the far end, one that extended underground and emerged just behind her basement window well. Let gravity do its thing. It rained the following weekend. A big one. Thunder, lightning, the whole works. I stepped outside in my boots, arms crossed, and watched as the water poured out of her gutter into my trench and disappeared underground. The next morning, I saw the aftermath. Wanda stood in her driveway screaming into her phone while 2 guys in rubber boots carried soaked boxes and ruined drywall out her basement door. Water had filled the entire bottom level of her house. Her white carpet was stained brown at the edges. A city inspector's van was parked in front of her driveway and she was waving paperwork like it was a magic wand. I'll admit I felt a little bad for the carpet. It was a nice carpet. By noon, I got the knock I was expecting. Wanda, red in the face and still in her bathrobe, shoved a wet stack of folders in my face. "You're going to pay for this, Kellan," she shrieked. "You redirected water into my foundation." "I redirected water coming from your illegally installed gutter," I replied. "You know gravity. I'm calling the police." "Do it. And while you're at it, maybe mention how you tampered with your gutter system without city approval. Or how you diverted runoff onto a neighbor's property, which is a misdemeanor in this county." She blinked rapidly. You can't prove anything. I smiled. Actually, I can. I've got photos of your gutter before and after. And I have video. Security cam caught the contractor installing it without permits. I also have footage of the flooding. All time-stamped. Her mouth opened and closed twice. Then she stormed off, slamming her front door so hard it shook the siding. I thought that might be the end of it. But Wanda wasn't done. Not even close. The next HOA meeting would prove that she still thought she had the upper hand. She was dead wrong. The next HOA meeting took place in the community hall at the edge of the subdivision, a beige box with flickering fluorescent lights and a coffee pot that hadn't been cleaned since the Bush administration. The folding chairs were arranged in crooked rows, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and powdered creamer. I took a seat in the back corner, arms crossed, watching as the regulars trickled in. Most of them avoided eye contact, especially the ones who'd lived here long enough to know Wanda's brand of tyranny wasn't something you challenged unless you had a death wish or, in my case, a stack of evidence and a long fuse. Wanda strutted in fashionably late, wearing a navy pantsuit like she thought she was about to testify before Congress. Behind her came two of her lapdogs. Gerald, the HOA president who hadn't made a solo decision since 2011, and Bethany, the treasurer, who clutched a clipboard like it might fly away if she loosened her grip. "All right," Wanda announced as she reached the front table, not even giving Gerald a moment to speak. "We're starting with a matter of extreme urgency: property damage caused by a resident's unauthorized landscaping modifications which resulted in the flooding of my home." There were a few murmurs. Most people didn't know what she was talking about yet, but they could smell drama from a mile off, and drama was the only reason most of them even showed up. "Let's be clear," she continued, her hands folded like a stern librarian. "This isn't just about my home. This is about precedent. What happened could happen to any of you if we allow this sort of reckless behavior to go unchecked." I stood up slowly. "I'd like to respond to that," I said. Wanda didn't look pleased, but she forced a tight nod. "You have 2 minutes." "I don't need 2, I said. "The so-called unauthorized landscaping she's referring to was a gravel trench on my own property. It exists for one reason: to collect water that was illegally directed into my yard. I have time-stamped footage of her contractor installing a gutter extension that dumps directly over our shared property line. I have before and after photos. I've already submitted copies to the city's code enforcement office." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Bethany shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Wanda leaned forward. "You're conveniently omitting the fact that your trench redirected that runoff toward my foundation. That's malicious. Your water, Wanda," I said. "Your responsibility. Your legal installation. The fact that your basement wasn't waterproofed is not my fault. And if you'd like to discuss malice, I'd be happy to show everyone the footage of you standing on my property with a measuring tape 3 weeks ago without my consent." Gerald cleared his throat, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "I think we need to pause this discussion until we can review." "No need," I interrupted. "The city inspector already reviewed it. He cited her for unpermitted drainage alterations. You'll probably get a copy of the report next week." Wanda's face twitched, but she didn't speak. "I'd also like to request that any pending fines or citations related to my yard be voided immediately," I added. "They were issued under a regulation that doesn't exist in the HOA bylaws. 32C? Not in the charter." Bethany flipped through her papers, frowning. "He's right." Wanda turned on her. "It's supposed to be there. I drafted it 2 years ago. But it was never voted in," Bethany said. "It's not official." The silence was thick enough to choke on. "I also request a formal review of how citations are issued," I said. "Because if board members can just invent rules and slap fines on people without oversight, then this board is operating well outside its authority." A few neighbors nodded. I saw one guy in a flannel jacket whisper something to his wife, and she nodded emphatically. Gerald rubbed his temples. "We'll table the issue for a formal vote at the next meeting." Wanda glared at him like he'd kicked her cat. After the meeting, a few residents approached me in the parking lot. One of them, a guy named Ricardo who ran a landscaping business, clapped me on the back. "Took guts standing up to her," he said. "She fined me last year for planting blue pansies. Said they clashed with the community color palette." Another woman, Layla, mentioned that she'd been fined for having a hummingbird feeder visible from the street. That woman has too much time and not enough hobbies, she muttered. I realized something important in that moment. Wanda had been bullying the entire neighborhood for years, hiding behind the HOA's authority and inventing rules as she pleased. But no one had ever stood up to her with evidence and a spine. Until now. So I did what any irritated homeowner with a background in electrical work and a newfound taste for justice would do. I started collecting stories. Over the next 2 weeks, I visited neighbors between shifts, sometimes still in my coveralls, clipboard in hand. It turned out Wanda had fined over a dozen residents for made-up infractions. Unapproved mulch texture. Overly whimsical lawn decor. One guy got cited for having a compost bin that was too earthy. I'm not even joking. I compiled everything: dates, photos, copies of the fake citations, witness statements, and created a packet. Then I contacted a friend of mine from high school, Marcy, who was now working as an attorney specializing in property law. She reviewed everything and confirmed what I suspected. The HOA board had violated multiple clauses in their own charter, not to mention a few state statutes. Technically, she said, if they issued fines under non-existent regulations, that's fraud. And if they used that authority to target specific residents, that's selective enforcement. You've got a case. I didn't want to sue. Not yet. I wanted something better. I filed a petition to hold a special election to recall any board member who had issued fines or made regulatory decisions without a recorded vote. According to the bylaws, I needed signatures from at least 25% of homeowners. I got twice that. The recall vote was scheduled for the following month. Word spread fast. Some neighbors were thrilled. Others were cautious. A few were afraid Wanda would retaliate with more fines before she was removed. So I offered a solution. I helped a few folks install basic security cameras near their driveways and side yards. Nothing fancy, just motion-activated models that sent alerts to their phones. Wanda had a habit of inspecting properties when people weren't home. That habit quickly died when she realized half the neighborhood was now under quiet surveillance. One afternoon, I got a ping from my own cam. I checked the feed and saw her walking up to my porch with a manila envelope. She waved it in front of my door camera, then turned and left. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, a cease and desist letter accusing me of orchestrating a smear campaign against the HOA board. It was signed and printed on plain paper. No letterhead. No legal markings. I forwarded it to Marcy. She laughed so hard she dropped her phone. The night of the recall meeting, the community hall was packed. Standing room only. Tension buzzed in the air like a live wire. Gerald, looking like he hadn't slept in days, opened the meeting and immediately turned it over to the vote. Wanda stood stiffly, arms folded, her eyes scanning the room like she was calculating who'd betrayed her. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The neighborhood had already decided. The results weren't even close. Wanda was removed along with Gerald and Bethany. 3 new board members were sworn in on the spot, including Ricardo, who promised to never fine anyone for their flower color again. As people filtered out, there was laughter, actual laughter, not the nervous kind that usually followed Wanda's meetings. Neighbors stayed behind to talk, shake hands, and swap stories. For the first time since I'd moved in, the place felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. As I walked home, Layla caught up with me. You know, she said, you could have just paid that first fine and walked away. Yeah, I said. But then I'd still have a swamp for a backyard. And she'd still be running the show. She smiled. We owe you one. I shook my head. We owed each other. And just like that, the HOA that used to rule by fear had been knocked off its throne. Not by lawsuits or threats, but by facts, unity, and a well-placed drainage trench. 3 days after the recall vote, Wanda's house went dark. Not metaphorically, her actual power was cut. A handwritten sign taped to her storm door read, "Electrical repairs in progress, stay out." I didn't need to ask why. Word had already gotten around that the water damage had shorted out half her basement wiring. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was in my backyard, scraping mud off garden tools, when a voice called over the fence. Hey, Kellan, Ricardo said, leaning on the top rail. You hear about the insurance adjuster? No. What now? She tried to claim neighborhood sabotage, he said, shaking his head. Told the guy you engineered a hydraulic attack. I blinked. Is that even a thing? Not unless you're in a spy movie. Anyway, he walked out 15 minutes later. Said he'd be filing a report with the county instead. So Wanda's flood saga wasn't over, not by a long shot. And while the board was under new management, the mess she left behind was like mold in the drywall, hidden in places you didn't expect and harder to clean than anyone realized. The new board, led by Ricardo and two other residents, Tina, a retired paralegal, and Malik, a high school civics teacher, had their hands full. The first order of business had been auditing the HOA's records. I stayed out of that part. But a week later, Tina knocked on my door with a clipboard and a look that told me something big had come up. "We found a secondary ledger," she said, stepping into my garage. It was tucked behind an old file cabinet in the meeting hall's storage room. Dozens of transactions, none of them logged in the official books. How bad is it? There are payments to companies that don't exist. Charges for landscaping services that were never performed. And recurring maintenance fees for equipment the HOA doesn't actually own. I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. "You think Wanda was funneling money? We can't prove it yet. But there's at least $5,000 unaccounted for over the last 18 months. I didn't say anything. But I didn't need to. Tina handed me a copy of a receipt, $270 paid to Zellner Home Solutions for seasonal drainage maintenance. "Wanda wrote herself a check," I said. "3 times. Tina nodded. "And Gerald co-signed each one. So not only had she weaponized fake rules, but she'd also been bleeding the HOA dry while blaming residents for budget shortfalls. It explained why the community pool hadn't been resurfaced in years and why the playground still had a broken swing that no one ever fixed. "We're bringing in a forensic accountant," Tina said. "If this goes to court, we'll need airtight documentation." "You'll get it," I told her. "I'll help however I can." That same afternoon, I dropped by the meeting hall to install new motion lights at the back entrance. The previous setup had been fried during a storm, and the board figured an electrician on their side was better than hiring someone from across town. While I was mounting the last fixture, Malik came out carrying a cardboard box filled with what looked like old newsletters, meeting minutes, and a stack of manila envelopes. "These were stuffed under the back sink," he said. "Can you believe this?" She kept handwritten notes on every house in the neighborhood. I climbed down from the ladder and peered into the box. Page after page of scribbled entries, each labeled with a resident's name. Notes about who left their trash bins out too long, who had excessive lawn laughter after 10 p.m., and even one about a woman who hosted suspiciously frequent book clubs. "She was building profiles," I said. "Like a hall monitor with a grudge." Malik pulled out one sheet and handed it to me. My name was at the top. "Yard often unkempt. Possibly dangerous tools in view. Potential agitator monitor closely." He shook his head. I handed it back. "Looks like I lived up to the potential." By the end of the week, the forensic accountant had enough to start a formal report. The new board voted to freeze the HOA's discretionary spending until the investigation was complete. They also issued a neighborhood-wide statement summarizing what they'd found so far without naming names but making clear that there had been significant procedural misconduct. The reaction was swift. One house down the street put up a chalkboard sign that read "Refunds when." Another neighbor, a retired Navy guy named Tom, offered to donate his time to repaint the community benches if the board could reimburse him for materials. People who had kept to themselves for years were volunteering to help clean up the mess. It was like the lids had come off 100 pressure cookers. But not everyone was thrilled. 2 nights later, I caught movement on my security cam, a figure in a hooded jacket pacing in front of my driveway. They didn't approach the house, just stood in the street for a long minute, then walked away. I recognized the shape of the walk. I'd seen it enough during HOA meetings. Wanda wasn't taking her fall from grace quietly. The next morning, I found a plastic yard flamingo stabbed into my lawn with a note tied around its neck. "Hope your new board likes circus colors." I tossed it in the trash. But it got worse. That weekend, someone spray-painted "Traitor" across Tina's garage door. Malik's mailbox was smashed with a brick. Ricardo's tires were slashed. No cameras had caught it, but the pattern was obvious. The old regime wasn't just licking wounds, they were lashing out. We held an emergency board meeting in my garage. The hall felt too exposed and no one trusted the locks anymore. "This is vandalism," Malik said, pacing near the tool bench. "And intimidation. We should be filing police reports." "We already are," Tina said. "But we need to go further. We need to file a restraining order against Wanda." Ricardo nodded slowly. "She doesn't just want her power back. She wants to make sure no one else ever tries to take it from her again." I opened my laptop and pulled up the footage from my security cam, freezing it on the frame of Wanda standing on the street. She's testing boundaries, I said. And unless someone draws a new one, she's going to keep going. That night, I drafted a neighborhood petition in support of legal action against any former board member found guilty of misconduct. Not just to remove them, but to bar them from serving on any HOA committee, subcommittee, or advisory council for the next decade. It was bold. It was unprecedented. And it got 80 signatures in 48 hours. The final piece fell into place when the accountant turned over the full report. Over $6,000 redirected to fictitious services, more than 24 phantom vendors, and personal purchases charged as community improvement supplies. Gerald's name appeared on nearly every reimbursement form. The board voted unanimously to refer the case to the county district attorney. The fallout was swift and public. Local papers picked up the story. HOA havoc in Oakcrest, one headline read. Another called Wanda the Queen of Fines and Fraud. Both she and Gerald received subpoenas. Rumors swirled that Gerald had tried to delete files from his old laptop before investigators arrived. But the IT specialist recovered everything. Neighbors who had once whispered about Wanda now spoke openly. A few even held a backyard cookout to celebrate the end of the Zellner era. I brought my kid and some folding chairs. There was music, grilled corn, and laughter that didn't feel like it came with consequences. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Tina raised a toast with a plastic cup of lemonade. To the new HOA, she said, and to the neighbors who proved that a little water pressure can go a long way. Everyone laughed, including me. Because in the end, it wasn't just about drainage trenches or fake fines. It was about a neighborhood remembering what it meant to stand together. And about showing that no matter how deep the rot, someone was always willing to dig it out, wire it clean, and flip the switch back on. The mailbox stood crooked when I got home that Thursday. I hadn't noticed it in the morning, probably because I was running late and juggling a thermos, a half-eaten breakfast sandwich, and a call from a frantic site manager about a blown transformer. But now, under the amber glow of the porch light, I saw it leaning just enough to notice. Not broken. Just tampered with. I stepped closer. The base bolts had been loosened. Not removed, but twisted out enough for the whole thing to wobble if a breeze hit it right. Subtle. Just like everything else recently. I didn't touch it. I just turned on the front-facing camera, took a few photos, and uploaded them to the folder I'd started keeping on my laptop, labeled Zellner Fallout. At this point, it had more entries than my actual work invoices. Inside, my daughter sat at the kitchen table working on a shoebox diorama of a rainforest. She looked up as I came in and pointed at the mess of construction paper and glue sticks. "You think jaguars eat tree frogs?" she asked. "Only the rude ones," I said, hanging my jacket. "You want help with the trees?" "Already done. I just need to make it look more damp." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't want to ask your old man about dampness right now." She snorted and went back to gluing. That quiet moment didn't last long. My phone buzzed with a notification from the HOA group chat, something the new board had set up to make communication less formal and more transparent. Malik had posted a photo. A large black SUV had rolled into the neighborhood and parked in front of Wanda's house. No plates. Tinted windows. The caption read, "Guess who called backup?" I stared at the image. Then I typed out a message and hit send before I could second-guess it. "Don't engage. Let's see what she's planning first." The next morning, I found out exactly what that was. Wanda, in a pressed blouse and a fake smile, had brought in a private mediation consultant. She'd posted flyers on 5 community bulletin boards and even hired a teenager to hand-deliver copies door to door. The flyer was titled "Restoring Balance to Oakcrest, a Community Forum for Healing," and it listed her as the former Vice President, Community Liaison Emeritus. I didn't know whether to laugh or check if emeritus was even a real title in this context. At the bottom of the flyer, in small print, was a line that made my teeth grind. "Open to all residents seeking to move forward from recent misunderstandings." Malik called me before noon. "She thinks she can rewrite the narrative," he said. "Like this whole thing was just a little disagreement about fence lines and bylaws. She's trying to spin it into a redemption arc," I said. "Paint herself as the wounded peacemaker." "Exactly. And if enough people fall for it, she might push to get back on the advisory committee she drafted before the recall." No voting power, but still a platform. Not happening. Malik hesitated. She's got a few neighbors attending already. Some of the older ones. The ones who don't use email or the group chat. That was the problem. Wanda didn't need everyone. She just needed enough of the right people, the ones who still believed in order over fairness, to back her comeback tour. I hung up and drove straight to the community center. It was half full when I arrived. Folding chairs set up in neat rows, a folding table at the front with a cloth banner that read "Moving Forward Together." Wanda stood behind it, clasping her hands like she was about to deliver a TED Talk. The consultant, an older man in a blazer and jeans, sat beside her, flipping through a binder. I didn't take a seat. I leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, scanning the crowd. Most of the attendees were retirees, a few familiar, a few not. I spotted one man nodding along as Wanda spoke about neighborhood unity and the importance of shared accountability. Then she said my name. "We've all heard stories," she said, her voice syrupy. "And I'm not here to assign blame. But I think it's time we ask ourselves if retaliatory trenching and public shaming are really the values we want to model for our youth." I stepped forward. "You're right," I said, loud enough to stop the room. "Let's talk about what we're modeling." She faltered for a second. The consultant glanced up, wary. "Let's talk about siphoning HOA funds into fake companies," I continued. "Let's talk about issuing citations based on rules that never existed. Let's talk about directing stormwater runoff into another person's yard and then fining them for the damage." An older woman near the front turned to whisper something to the man beside her. Wanda's consultant held up a hand. "Sir, this isn't meant to be confrontational." Neither was my backyard until half of her house ended up in it. Wanda's face flushed, but she kept her posture. "This isn't the place for accusations," she said. "Then maybe it's the place for documentation," I replied. "I've got copies of the city's inspection report, the financial audit, and security footage." "Should I pass them around?" The room went still. The consultant cleared his throat. "Perhaps it would be more productive to schedule a formal mediation between the involved parties." "No thanks," I said. She already tried to resolve things with a flamingo and a can of spray paint. That did it. A few people chuckled. One woman actually laughed out loud. Wanda's mouth opened, then shut. "I think we're done here," I said, and walked out. The next few days were quiet. Wanda's forum fizzled. Her consultant left town. No advisory committee formed. But the damage control tour wasn't over yet, not for her and not for the rest of us. 2 weeks later, the city announced that due to the HOA's past mismanagement, Oakcrest would be subject to a mandatory compliance audit. Every spending request, maintenance contract, and improvement project would need pre-approval from a municipal liaison for the next year. It wasn't punitive, they said, just precautionary. The board called an emergency session. It wasn't panicked, just focused. I watched from the side as Tina laid out a plan. Streamline requests, digitize records, publish all decisions within 24 hours. She even proposed a rotating oversight committee made up of residents with relevant backgrounds: finance, law, construction. They asked me to join. I said yes. Not because I wanted to be on another committee, but because the last time someone with power and no oversight got a taste of control, she tried to rewrite the rules by drowning everyone else. The first order of business under the new oversight group was a soil drainage survey. We brought in an independent firm, not the one Wanda had used and paid herself through. They mapped every runoff path, every slope, every hidden pipe. We found 3 other properties with minor water redirection issues, nothing malicious, just bad grading from when the development was first built. We fixed them all within a week using volunteer labor and board-approved funds. No citations, no backdoor fines, just work. The second order of business was more symbolic. We repainted the community bulletin boards and installed new ones near the mailboxes. The top of each one had a single engraved plaque. "Transparency is the foundation we build on." I didn't write it. Layla did. But I helped install them all. Wanda, for her part, stayed quiet. Her house went up for sale a month later. No open house. No goodbye. Just a moving truck and a for sale sign that disappeared one weekend while I was out rewiring a library. I came home that Sunday and saw the new family standing in her yard. A couple and their teen son. The boy waved at me. I waved back. Later that night, I installed a motion light on their porch. No charge. The neighborhood wasn't perfect after that. It never would be. People still disagreed about paint colors and where to put recycling bins. But no one was afraid of being fined over a flower pot. No one worried about secret meetings or fake regulations. And no one had to dig a trench just to make a point. Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom or a news article. Sometimes it comes in the shape of a gravel path, a camera lens, or a neighborhood that finally decides it's done being quiet. And for me, I went back to my backyard, reseeded the grass, and rebuilt the sandbox from scratch. This time with a drainage layer beneath it, just in case.